We were all born here. This is our street. That's our fence. It's on our property. Take it down. It's already been ruled illegal. Take it down and leave our town. Our police were doing a fine job, and they're still doing a fine job.
The focus here is racial equality, racial justice, but you see just how inflammatory the federal presence has been. It has now shifted in some ways the focus to the federal presence on the ground, and that has inflamed tensions here.
And this is Portland, Oregon. Another late night of police facing off with protesters here. And something new, what you're seeing here, a wall of veterans arrived, vowing to protect protesters against federal agents who on Friday used flashbangs and tear gas to break up crowds outside the federal courthouse. And that is where we find CNN correspondent Lucy Kavanaugh. She's been there for quite some time now. Lucy, in the thick of the things, what is the situation right now?
Well, Natalie, we're standing very close to that fence that has been erected to protect the federal courthouse building where federal agents are located. The crowd is right up at the fence. We've been seeing, in some ways, a repeat of the clashes on Friday, where protesters began to shake and rattle the fence. We actually saw a very small group with some sort of a grinder trying to cut through the fence. That then elicits a response from the federal agents. They come out, they throw pepper balls with so-called less than lethal munitions to try to disperse the crowd. People then shoot fireworks into the fence area. So it kind of continues. I have my gas mask on because I've seen quite a lot of tear gas and pepper spray and that stuff. I can tell you it hurts. You know, we were speaking to you last hour on the other street, and there were just so many demonstrators with tears pouring out of their eyes, coughing, very much injured from the tear gas that's been deployed here. And it's been interesting watching the shift in the protest. You see, like during the day, it's a largely peaceful crowd. The message is very much focused on racial equality, racial justice, Black Lives Matter. As the hours get later and later, the focus becomes on the federal presence here, the inflammatory federal presence here. A lot of people here chanting, "Feds go home, get out of Portland, PDX." And so, yeah, that's basically what we've been seeing back and forth. Again, by and large, the demonstrations have been peaceful, but this is around the time of night when you see things get a little bit more tense, a little bit more hairy. Natalie.
All right, we appreciate you watching it for us. Their resolve is certainly apparent there on the streets. Lucy Kavanaugh outside the federal courthouse there in Portland. We thank you.
Well, what you're seeing there, that's the aftermath of what police are calling a riot in Seattle, Washington. Flames and smoke shooting up into the sky after intense clashes between protesters and police. Now, at first, people gathered peacefully to support Black Lives Matter and their fellow protesters in Portland, Oregon, but police say things turned violent and they had to use tear gas to clear out crowds. On top of the fire, police say an explosive injured at least 3 officers. Cars were attacked, and by the end of the day, officers made at least 45 arrests. Now, that was Seattle, and down the highway in Portland, another late night of federal agents facing off with protesters. CNN's Lucy Kavanaugh was out in the middle of it a short time ago.
This night began with a very large, over 1,000 crowd of peaceful demonstrators, people coming out to chant Black Lives Matter, to chant say his name, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the names of so many Black Americans who have been killed at the hands of the police. We then saw a repeat of some of the clashes that we saw yesterday evening. My crew and I had to move away from the federal building, which is sort of back there and around the corner, because it wasn't clear what actually sparked the confrontation, but we did see federal agents emerge from the building behind the barrier that they had erected. They started lobbing tear gas to try to disperse the crowd. Some of the demonstrators threw fireworks over the fence at the federal agents, and so this confrontation ensued. As this was happening, we still saw this so-called wall of moms, the women in yellow t-shirts who have been coming out nightly, linking arms to try to put their physical bodies between themselves and the federal agents to protect protesters, pardon my language. We also saw other demonstrators with leaf blowers trying to blow the tear gas back towards the federal agents away from the crowd. As it happens with these confrontations, protesters then began to move away from the federal building to get away from the tear gas. We caught a big whiff of it ourselves, and I have to say it's a very uncomfortable, unpleasant experience. It burns your eyes, it burns your nose, your throat, everything starts to water. We saw some people actually nursing injuries. Perhaps they were hit by some sort of shrapnel. It wasn't really clear what it was, but at least one person I saw had some blood on his forehead, a demonstrator. But another thing we saw this evening, a very powerful image. Another human wall, this time military veterans joining the movement to protect Black Lives Matter. They lined up in front of the federal building when things were still calm to try to put themselves between the federal officers and the demonstrators. We had a chance to speak to one, Don Thompson. He's a retired U.S. Navy veteran. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We were all born here. This is our street. That's our fence. It's on our property. Take it down. It's already been ruled illegal. Take it down and leave our town. Our police were doing a fine job, and they're still doing a fine job.
The focus here is racial equality, racial justice, but you see just how inflammatory the federal presence has been. It has now shifted in some ways the focus to the federal presence on the ground, and that has inflamed tensions here.
The president of the Portland branch of the NAACP wrote a Washington Post op-ed about the protests. He warns the demonstrations are turning into a spectacle and being co-opted by people with their own agendas. The Reverend Ed Mondane spoke earlier with my colleague Michael Holmes.
Those protests were sparked by a video of a death of a man, we all know his name, and we asked people to say his name, George Floyd, at the hands of police. For the first few weeks, we were chanting his name at the rallies and holding up the banner of Black Lives Matter. Now, while myself and the NAACP has denounced the involvement of federal law enforcement here in Portland, it seems to be the feds who are being protesters, not state violence against Black people, and that has kind of turned this into the spectacle that we see.